Thank you very much indeed. In fact, I would like to thank the Shivaji University and Dr. Megha Pansare in particular for so kindly inviting me to speak at this symposium on the contemporary dynamics of South Asia. It is indeed an honor for me to have been invited. Thank you. We shall soon be celebrating 75 years as an independent nation. This is the moment to pause and consider whether we have achieved what we set out to achieve at the time of independence in 1947. That was the point at which we converted ourselves from being a colony of the British colonial empire to becoming a free nation state. India was no longer a collection of kingdoms as it had been before it was colonized, nor were the people of India any longer subjects of the British Crown. We were now a sovereign democratic state whose population consisted of free and autonomous citizens subject to none. Secular nationalism has resulted in the bringing together of Indians in the demand for freedom, the most momentous change in our history. The kind of state and society that we wanted was a democratic, secular nation state. This was embedded in the constitution that was agreed upon by all, and the acceptance of which we remember and celebrate on Republic Day. The question today is whether the structure envisaged by the Constitution has been put into practice as foundational to the nation. The Constitution is what every government swears to uphold, but we have to ask, what of it is actually being upheld? This is a crucial question because the Constitution may protect us from attempts to deny the democratic and secular structure of our state and society. This is a problem that doesn't beset only India, but there are many other countries in the world today which are also thinking along these lines. What does the Constitution require of us? It requires three essentials: that we be a democratic nation state, that we guard against attempts to weaken our democratic functioning, and that we give authority to three basic institutions to protect our democratic functioning, namely the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary. These are the agencies through which democracy is practiced, and therefore their autonomy has to be ensured. The question we have to ask is whether in our 75 years of freedom so far, we have ensured the autonomy of these institutions. That of the legislature began with the decree that there should be adult franchise, a major act of the Nehru government. It enabled us to be a democracy. Legislation was extensively debated in both the Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha before being passed. Representing the views of citizens in the process of governance was new to our history. And as long as people are subjects, they are recipients of government orders. But when they mutate into citizens and they become citizens, then they have a say in what is to be ordered and why. Over the years, this aspect has undergone change. The former procedure of one person, one vote continues. but it is also accompanied now by a variety of what may be called opaque arrangements at different levels between candidates and political parties, as well as the crossing over of defectors on the eve of elections. Why are the financial outlays of each party increasing enormously with each election? If, as citizens, we know the answer, then we should speak up on it. The cynicism of the electorate is of no avail. It is now becoming routine to rush bills through both houses, almost like a formality and without a debate, whether small or substantial. This again demands attention and correction. The executive, and more specifically, the administrative services and the police, have been the steel frame of all state systems since the start of the state in India many centuries ago. Early texts, Sanskrit texts discussing the state, such as the Arthashastra of Kautilya, have mentioned its 7 limbs as the ruler, the minister or the administration, the force to protect sovereignty, the collection of taxes to fill the treasury, friendly allies, fortifications, and territory. From the Mauryas to the Cholas and the Mughals, the emphasis in practice was on maintaining a force, on adequate finance, and a reasonable administration. Ashok Maurya was remarkable because he proclaimed that his governance, linked to executive functions, was directed to the well-being of his subjects. Most other rulers whom we hold up as role models, the Guptas, the Cholas, the Mughals, make few specific references to this. Yet, routine governance rested on the functioning of the executive. In pre-modern times, only a few complained about the manner in which the administration and the policing force treated the subjects of the kingdom. But with the coming of the nation state, however, this has changed. Technically, the citizen now has the right to object to injustice and ill treatment by the agencies of the executive. It is another matter, however, that often, because of the low caste status and impoverishment of half the population, those that run the executive institutions continue to be feared by most people. This fear that was enforced in colonial functioning has to be discontinued. The third basic institution is that of the judiciary. In earlier times, kingdoms had judicial officers whose primary function was to ensure that government orders were carried out, and those that disobeyed them were punished. Judicial officers were called upon to settle disputes, largely linked to crimes, and to a far lesser extent to the breaking of civil laws, because such laws were anyway few in number in pre-modern times. However, when the free citizen replaced the subject citizen, the citizen who was questioning or opposing authority was a departure from the past. This was a change that came in with modern times. And especially now, when the legal equality of all citizens is a law and is basic to social justice. The civil law, therefore, is today a significant aspect of judicial activity. And one hopes that both the citizen and the judiciary are fully aware of what this means to governance. Colonial rule introduced a judicial system in an effort to facilitate the governance of the colony. But in important aspects, such as the freedom of expression to criticize authority, they did not concede this right. This freedom was curtailed by other laws, such as the law of sedition. And this law was linked to the political domain in colonial times. It limits the rights of the citizen, hence the legitimate demand today for its removal. The question is sometimes asked as to who these three institutions are answerable to. Is it to those in authority or to the citizens whose rights they are required to protect? It's a pertinent question for our times when citizens can be arrested and jailed indefinitely without a trial. Where there is no appeal to habeas corpus, this becomes all too common. An instance of this is the Bhima Koregaon case, where citizens were arrested 3 years ago and have yet to be brought to trial. These three institutions have to ensure the well-being of society in accordance with the Constitution. And the Constitution is fundamentally important to the contemporary life of South Asia. Their functioning obviously becomes more effective when citizens from all levels of society and every occupation acquire a clearer understanding of their rights under the Constitution and in law, as well as their implementation. There is a need, therefore, for a more widespread familiarity with the meaning of the Constitution, as well as the rights and obligations that it documents. What are the rights and obligations of the free citizen? The rights are to be guaranteed by the state. The obligations to observe the laws of the state are to be met by the citizens, provided that the rights are not contradicted by these laws. Priority should be given to ensuring that every citizen has access to food, water, and shelter. To make this more effective, the citizen should also have the right to healthcare, education, and employment. The economy, therefore, becomes very primary and has to be so planned as to make these rights feasible in the political system. It is not enough to use them as election slogans or claim them as programs of benevolence. The implementation of these rights is what is essential to acceptable governance. And the awareness of these rights and their implementation should be the concern of both the legislature and the executive. The judiciary is central to the next set of rights relating to the social equality of all citizens, to the freedom of expression, and to social justice. These are crucial to the good relations between the citizen and the state, as is obvious from the many relations that have existed in the last 75 years. And fundamental to the functioning of these rights is the right to information. Citizens must know what actions and decisions are being taken in their name, and such information ensures their well-being. We must remember that dissenting ideas and actions have always been a part of the Indian tradition, but their formulation as a right, that is something more recent. Historically, this formulation of rights is a new feature essential to modern society, as is evident from the Constitution. Every citizen must know and understand these rights. And there is something we still have to do, starting perhaps with familiarizing high school students with their rights as given in the Constitution. The existence of a democratic nation is not limited to the functioning of these three institutions that I have mentioned, however important they are. Democracy demands the equality of all citizens. No category of citizens can have priority over others, irrespective of historical practice or what is projected as cultural heritage or described as the religion of the majority. This impinges on the way in which we use the idea of identity. When historians study the creation of past and present identities of a nation over many centuries, two obvious facts emerge. One is that identities are an amalgam of many features. And secondly, therefore, they change over time. This is crucial to remember as a historical axiom. There is no such thing as a single unchanging identity that refers to the same community and their descendants over millennia. These identities have changed. The ancestors of those living in the Indian subcontinent today belonged to a range of varied identities from earliest times. We don't know what the Harappans called themselves, as their language has not been deciphered so far. But genetic evidence based on DNA analyses from skeletons tells us that they were a mix of elements, some local to northern India and some Eastern Iranian. Subsequent to this, the Vedic texts refer to the elite groups as Aryas, who are distinct from the many others, whom they call Dasas. The linguistic, religious, and cultural difference between the two is emphasized. DNA sources provide evidence of a genetic strain from Central Asia, dating to about 4,000 years before the present, entering North India. This would be the first of many continuous migrations from Central Asia into North India, up to recent times. Ancient texts mention the arrival of the Shakas, the Scythians, the Kushans, the Hunas, the Huns, and the Turushkas, the Turks. They came in a variety of ways. Some came in small groups as pastoralists or as traders. Later, they were part of an invading army. Or they came together with the Sufi missions. They settled in different parts of the subcontinent, and this gave rise to new religious sects, languages, communities, some of which grew from intermarriage and castes, and therefore gave rise to new identities. The migrations were not all incoming. Traders from the subcontinent accompanied Buddhist monks into Central Asia, China, Southeast Asia. And in the early first millennium AD, the prominent religion was Buddhism. But by the late first millennium, Puranic Hinduism was slowly replacing it. And in the second millennium AD, Islam entered in slow stages brought by the Arabs and the Central Asian Turks. The Arabs were initially called Yavana, the term that Indians had used for the early Hellenistic people, but later for anyone from the West. And when Queen Victoria, for example, made a presentation, a proclamation of her rule over the British Empire, including India, she was greeted as an empress from the Yavana lands. The Arabs came in larger numbers as traders across the Arabian Sea and settled all along the coast of Western India. The settlements gave rise to a variety of Indo-Arab cultures and religious sects, variously called Khojas, Bohras, Nawayats, Mapilas, and such like. When trade on the Indian Ocean opened up in other areas, with India playing a major role, there was further interaction between locals and migrants. Eventually, the Europeans arrived and the British colonized India, but did not settle here. Big difference between the arrival of the Europeans and the earlier people. The British imposed on us the erroneous history that Indian society has always consisted of only two monolithic unitary religious groups, the Hindu and the Muslim, and that Indian history is the narrative of the continuous hostility between the two. The fact, however, is that it was the reverse. There were multiple groups constantly interacting and evolving, and this multiplicity accounted for the richness of Indian culture. In looking afresh at sources of Indian history from a non-colonial perspective, as many historians have been doing in the last 50 years, the shape of Indian society takes a very different form from that of this colonial definition of India. Religions were not unitary and monolithic. They consisted largely of a juxtaposition of communities and sects, which, as with other societies, had periods of coexistence and periods of conflict. These conflicts, however, were always at a local level, and they sorted out their relationships at this level. There were no all India organizations in pre-modern times. It was neither a society that tolerated every difference in a non-violent way, nor was it a society given to constant violent confrontations. And like all complex pre-modern societies, it had contradictions, some leading to intolerance and some that were settled harmoniously. But these relations were in and among various communities in diverse regions. These were not battles between two all India religions. Basically, Indian society has always been many-faceted, and this allowed the different groups to express themselves and sort out their problematic relationships largely at their own local level. The term Hindu, from the Iranian Hindu, in Arabic, al-Hind, is in origin a geographical term linked to the river Indus. And it is only as late as the 15th century AD that it came to refer to the religion practiced in India other than Islam. Sanskrit texts of the time do not refer to the Hindu religion. They refer to two systems of belief, the Brahman and the Nastik, those that believed in deity and those that did not. And these were said to be the two prevailing systems. This dichotomy between Brahman and Nastik goes back to Mauryan times, but the constituents of the Nastik change. Earlier, it consisted of Buddhists and Jains in the main. But now, in the 16th century, the Turushkas, the Turks from Central Asia, were added. The Buddhists and the Jains rejected deity, but the Turks who were Muslims, believed in a deity, in Allah, but not a Puranic deity. Therefore, they are included amongst the non-believers. I'm just trying to explain all this as being a rather more complicated situation than the one that is popularly projected. This intermixing of peoples, languages, and cultures is not unique to the Indian subcontinent. It has been the historical experience of most parts of the world. We all have multiple ancestries, and their importance changes from time to time. In current times, we are aware of this, so we have to work out a pattern that enables us to live together cooperatively with this multiplicity, as we did in the past. It is rational and logical to choose a democratic pattern of life, since majoritarianism of any kind is opposed to democracy, as also the ethos of India viewed historically. This means that no single identity, irrespective of whether it is religion or language, can be given priority and treated as superior. The identity that we worked out for ourselves through the national movement for independence was that we were Indians above all else. Every citizen was an Indian primarily, and as such had equal rights. This is our contemporary identity. The Hindus in the past disowned the non-Hindus as the Mlech, and the Muslims in the past disowned the non-Muslims as Kafirs. But the Indian, the category of Indian, includes every citizen as Indian. This is one absolute difference between pre-modern times and our times. We have to understand and to honor our identity of being Indian. And this identity should come with its component of ethical values of tolerance and refraining from violence against others. This inclusiveness is an essential of citizenship and is required also by our Constitution. Every Indian citizen has the same rights, the rights that I have spoken of earlier. And it is only when we understand the proper meaning of citizenship and start implementing these rights, it is then that we will have understood what it means to be a properly independent nation. Thank you very much.